Hi, I'm Rowella. At my company's grand opening, my moment of triumph, my grandfather smiled and asked how I liked the private jet he'd gifted me. I froze. A jet? I never received anything. My brother smirked. My parents went pale. And in that instant, I realized this wasn't a mistake. It was a betrayal years in the making. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this? And where are you? Drop a comment below. Because this isn't just a story about stolen gifts. It's about what happens when the family you trusted most builds their empire by quietly clipping your wings, until you decide to burn it all down. I had dreamed of this night for years. The soft glow of the chandeliers reflected on the polished marble floors, the buzz of investors chatting over cocktails, the cameras flashing. It was everything I had imagined when I first decided to build this company from scratch. My company, my name on the wall, my ideas finally standing on their own. For the first time, I felt like I had stepped out of the shadow my family had cast over me for so long. Being the youngest in a family like mine meant one thing: I was always the afterthought. My brother Lucien, the golden boy, was the son we all revolved around, or at least that's how my parents saw it. I can't count how many times I'd heard, "Why can't you be more like him?" Or, "Lucien will carry on the family legacy." For years, I swallowed those words and let them settle like stones in my chest, quietly working while they bragged about him to anyone who would listen. But tonight wasn't about them. Tonight was mine. The grand opening of my tech headquarters wasn't just a business milestone. It was my declaration of independence. I walked through the crowd, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, and fielding questions from the press. Every step I took was measured, confident. I wanted them all to see me for who I was, not the invisible daughter they'd ignored for decades. And then I saw him, my grandfather Silas. My chest loosened as soon as I caught sight of him. The man who taught me how to fish in the summers, who mailed me books when no one else remembered my birthday, who always said I had something special in me, even when no one else could see it. He was standing near the bar, tall and commanding despite his age, a glass of bourbon in hand. "Grandpa," I said, my voice lighter than it had been all evening. I made my way toward him, weaving between clusters of people until I could wrap my arms around him. "You came." "Wouldn't miss it, Rowella," he said, his voice gravelly but warm. He patted my shoulder with that familiar firmness that always made me feel grounded. "Look at this place. You did it. I'm proud of you." I didn't realize how badly I needed those words until I heard them. "Thank you," I whispered, the noise of the room fading for a moment. "It means more than you know." We stood there, side by side, surveying the room, until he turned to me with a grin that made my heart swell. "So," he said casually, "did you like the private jet I gave you last year? You can fly me home later, right?" It was as if someone had cut the music. My brain couldn't process what he had just said. The private jet he gave me? My body locked in place, and I felt every pair of eyes around us shift in our direction. My grip on my champagne flute tightened until my knuckles turned white. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice barely audible. "You gave me a jet?" Silas chuckled, as if he thought I was teasing him. "Of course. I had it delivered last year, as a congratulations for closing your first round of funding. I told your parents to make sure you got it. I assumed you'd been enjoying it." I swallowed hard, my mind scrambling for words that wouldn't come. "I never received anything." That's when I saw them, Lucien, my mother, and my father, standing near the corner of the room. They weren't smiling anymore. My mother's face drained of color. My father's jaw clenched so tight it could have cracked his teeth. And Lucien? He wouldn't even look at me. Suddenly, everything clicked. My parents had taken it. My brother had used it. And they had done it so casually, so confidently, that it hadn't even occurred to them I might find out. The chatter in the room shifted. Whispered voices swirled around me. I could feel the judgment, the pity, The invisible daughter, humiliated in front of investors, friends, and strangers. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor, but I stood frozen, forcing myself to keep my chin up while my insides crumbled. I turned back to Silas, and for the first time, I couldn't read his face. His smile had vanished, replaced by something cold and unreadable. He stared past me, at them. At his son, his daughter-in-law, and his golden grandson. The silence was deafening. Then, without warning, he hurled his glass against the wall. It shattered with a sharp crack, sending bourbon splattering across the floor. Every conversation in the room died instantly. You could have heard a pin drop. Silas took a slow breath, his eyes locked on my parents. When he spoke, his voice was low, deliberate, and terrifyingly calm. "Explain. Now." For the first time in my life, I saw my parents speechless. Silas didn't raise his voice, but the weight of it carried like a hammer through the room. He didn't need to. When he spoke like that, people listened, or they ran. He stepped toward my parents, his eyes fixed on them, and motioned for me and Lucienne to follow. My feet felt like they were made of lead, but I went with him. "Not here," he said sharply, leading us toward the velvet rope that separated the VIP section from the main floor. I barely noticed the murmurs behind us, or the way the music had faltered again. All I could hear was the pounding in my ears. Once the door to the private lounge clicked shut, Silas turned. "Where is the jet I bought for Rowella?" His voice was low, even, but I could feel the steel behind every word. My father, Dorian, stood stiffly by the bar, his hands buried in his pockets like he was too casual for this conversation. My mother, Marigold, clutched her clutch to her chest, fingers digging into the gold leather. Lucien leaned against the wall with a smirk, as if this was some inconvenience he was humoring. I didn't say anything. I watched. Every twitch, every shallow breath. Marigold's eyes darting between Silas and Dorian. Dorian's lips parting, closing, like he was rehearsing which lie would sound the least pathetic. Lucien tapping his thumb against the wall, just enough to be heard. They were unraveling, and they knew it. "It must have been a shipping error," Marigold said finally, her voice too sweet, too careful. "Silas, maybe it was never delivered." "Don't you dare," Silas snapped, cutting her off like a whip. The room shrank. Even Lucienne blinked. Marigold flinched but tried again. "I'm just saying. You're just lying." Silas's tone was so matter-of-fact it made my chest ache. Dorian stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Dad, there were complications. Legal transfer issues. You know how these things can get tangled." We didn't want to burden Rowella with the details. Complications. That was their favorite word when they stole things that weren't theirs. Silas turned to Lucienne. "And you?" Lucienne didn't flinch. He shrugged, arrogant as ever. "It wasn't practical for her," he said, like I wasn't standing right there. "She doesn't need that kind of thing. I do. I can represent the family better with it." It felt like a slap across my face. Not just the words, but the way he said them, like I was some placeholder daughter who didn't matter, like I was nothing. My throat burned, and for a moment all I wanted to do was scream, to throw every ounce of rage I had at them and make them feel what I had felt for years. Invisible, disposable. But I didn't. If I lost control, they would win. So I stayed silent. I looked at each of them, let my silence settle heavy in the room, and I saw it. Discomfort. They didn't know what I would do next, and that unnerved them more than any outburst could have. Silas broke the quiet. "You sold it, didn't you?" His gaze moved from my father to my mother to Lucien. "For cash, or worse." No one answered, and that told us everything. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, that my grandfather had to drag them into a corner and demand answers about a gift meant for me. But it wasn't funny. It was the story of my life, playing out one more time. They take, they lie, and I'm left standing there with nothing but the scraps of their excuses. Silas turned to me, his face softer now, but his words still cut deep. This ends tonight. But first, I want to know, how long have they been stealing from you? My stomach dropped. Stealing from me. How long? My mind was spinning. If they took the jet, what else had they taken? Deals? Money? Opportunities? My name? For the first time, I wasn't just the youngest daughter. I was the one who held their secrets, and tonight, I'd start uncovering every single one. I drove home from the grand opening in silence. The city lights blurred past my windshield, but I didn't really see them. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, as though I could hold on to some sense of control that way. By the time I stepped into my condo, kicked off my heels, and let the door close behind me, it was past midnight. The room was quiet, too quiet, but my mind was anything but. I sank into the couch without turning on the lights. My own party, my night, had been hijacked. I couldn't get Silas's voice out of my head, nor the way my parents' eyes had darted, the smug curve of Lucian's lips. The humiliation burned deep. But what hurt more than tonight was what it represented. I stared at the ceiling and thought of all the times I'd ignored the signs. There was that first year when I scraped together every ounce of courage to pitch my startup to investors. Silas had been the one to believe in me, the only one. He gave me the seed money, said it was for my future. But the funds didn't show up in my account for weeks. When I asked about it, my parents told me not to worry, that they'd handled it for me. Back then, I didn't press. I told myself they were helping. Then there was the office space. Silas had gifted me a property downtown, a place I could grow my company without worrying about rent bleeding me dry. But before I could even settle in, my parents told me they'd managed it, said it made more sense to liquidate. I found out months later they'd sold it, quietly, without my signature, without my consent. It was for the family, my mother had said when I confronted her, and I'd believed her. How many times did I hand them my wings and call it loyalty? It wasn't just about a jet, it wasn't about tonight, it was about my whole life, the constant taking, the subtle erasure. I was useful when I was quiet, when I nodded along, when I let them make choices for me. I thought I was being a good daughter, but in reality, I was just handing them pieces of myself to tear apart and trade as they saw fit. I sat up and grabbed my laptop from the coffee table. My fingers trembled as I opened up old files, bank statements, anything I could access. I scrolled through transaction histories, revisited old emails, looked for patterns. And there they were, clear as day. Delays in funds. Assets I'd never fully received. Transactions I'd been told were temporary that had never reversed. This wasn't an isolated incident. They didn't just steal my jet. They'd been stealing my life. That realization gutted me. I shut the laptop and pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes, willing the tears to stop. For a moment, I broke. I sobbed into my empty condo, the sound bouncing off the walls, ugly and raw. Years of betrayal crashed over me all at once. But after the storm of tears came something else. A quiet, searing clarity. If I didn't fight, they'd keep clipping my wings until there was nothing left of me. This wasn't just about money or gifts or jets. This was about who I was allowed to be in my own family, and I was done being their pawn. As if on cue, my phone buzzed on the table. It was barely 6 a.m. Silas. I answered on the first ring. "Rowella," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "I know this isn't the first time. Meet me today. We're going to fix this." His words steadied me. For a moment, I wasn't the overlooked daughter anymore. I wasn't alone. After we hung up, I turned back to my laptop. I started compiling every document I could find. Receipts, contracts, anything that smelled even remotely suspicious. Every transaction they'd touched, every asset they'd claimed to manage. If they wanted to play games, I'd bring the entire rulebook to light. By the time the sun crept through my blinds, my desk was covered in papers, my laptop full of files, and my resolve hardened like steel. If they wanted war, I'd give them one. And this time, I wouldn't fight alone. By the time the sun came up, I wasn't their overlooked daughter anymore. I was their reckoning. Morning light poured into my condo, but it didn't feel like a new day. It felt like a battlefield. I had barely moved from my desk when I heard the knock at my door. It was early, too early for anyone but him. Silas didn't wait for me to answer. He pushed the door open like he owned the place and stepped inside, his cane tapping against the hardwood floor. "You've been quiet too long," he said without greeting. "They've taken advantage because you let them." I swallowed hard, unsure if his bluntness stung more because it was true. "I thought staying quiet kept the peace," I admitted, my voice rough from a night without sleep. "But peace at that cost. It's just slavery, isn't it?" His eyes softened for a moment. "You finally see it." He took a seat across from me, resting both hands on his cane. "Good, because now we do something about it." The words hit me like an anchor thrown into deep water, heavy but stabilizing. "Something about it," I repeated, almost to myself. My voice grew steadier. "I want every single thing they took. I want my life back." "Then you'll get it," he said simply. "But this time, you won't be doing it alone." The rest of the morning blurred into strategy. Silas didn't just come with anger, he came with a plan. He revealed he already had a team. Lawyers, forensic accountants, people who'd been untangling messy family empires long before mine fell into their laps. He leaned in and said, "We're going to audit every transaction tied to your name, every gift, every transfer, every lie." I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of that promise. "And when we find them?" "Then," he said, "we'll make them sign over everything they stole. We'll do it face to face. No more whispers in the dark. No more backroom games. They'll look you in the eye while they hand it all back." I nodded. It sounded brutal. It sounded perfect. By mid-morning, his team had set up in his office, a place I'd been in a dozen times but never as a co-conspirator. Papers spread across the massive table, laptops humming as they combed through years of my financial records. It didn't take long before the real horror surfaced. They found more. A luxury condo, one Silas had gifted me years ago, wasn't in my name anymore. It was Lucian's. My pulse spiked when I saw the document. He hadn't even bothered to hide it. Another discovery followed. A trust fund Silas had set up for me, supposedly managed by my parents, was now empty. Every cent. Gone. "This wasn't neglect," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "This was premeditated theft." Silas glanced up from the papers, his jaw set. "It always was." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling for a long moment, letting the realization sink in. My parents, my brother, the people I'd defended, excused, believed in, systematically gutting everything that was mine. My fingers dug into the armrest of the chair. "They think I'm still the little girl who won't fight back." "Then show them they're wrong," Silas said. I didn't hesitate. I opened my laptop and typed out an email to my parents and Lucian. My hands were steady now. "Meet me tomorrow," I wrote. "Bring everything you've taken. If you don't, I go public." I hit send before I could second-guess it. The email was met with silence. No replies, no frantic phone calls. But I knew them. They'd seen it. They were deciding how to spin it, how to twist it back on me like they always did. That night, I sat in Silas's office as the sun dipped low, the weight of it all pressing down, but no longer suffocating. I wasn't afraid of them anymore. I was preparing for them. Silas stood by the window, watching the city lights blink on. "Tomorrow," he said, turning to me, "we take back everything." I nodded, my resolve like steel. "Tomorrow," I echoed. But when tomorrow came, they didn't show up alone, and that told me exactly how far they were willing to go. They arrived like they were walking into a courtroom, not a negotiation. Lucian pushed open Silas's office door without knocking, flanked by two attorneys who looked like they'd been hand-picked for their ability to intimidate. Their suits were immaculate, their expressions cold, and they carried thick files under their arms. Behind them, my parents followed. My mother, Marigold, wore that calm, measured expression she used when she wanted to appear above it all. My father, Dorian, moved slower, his face unreadable, but his smugness leaked through in the slight curve of his lips. Silas was already seated at the head of the conference table. He didn't stand. He simply leaned back in his chair, cane resting across his lap like a weapon in disguise. "You came," he said evenly, but I could hear the contempt under his tone. Lucian didn't sit right away. He glanced at me, then at Silas, as if measuring the room. "You wanted to meet," he said, his voice oozing false courtesy. "So here we are." I didn't reply. Not yet. My pulse drummed in my ears, but I forced myself to stay composed. We all sat down. The attorneys placed their files on the table deliberately, like they were staking territory. One of them, a tall, gray-haired man, finally spoke. "Before we begin, we want to make it clear this is a family matter. Our clients are here in good faith." Silas's chuckle was short and humorless. "Good faith. That's rich." Marigold folded her hands and turned to me. "Rowella," she began softly, as if speaking to a confused child. "You're upset. I understand. But you're misinformed. Those assets, your trust, the condo, even that jet, none of those were just yours. They were managed for you. You wouldn't even have this company without us." Her voice was honeyed poison. "Managed?" I repeated. "Is that what we're calling theft now?" Dorian leaned forward, his hands steepled. "You're acting like a child. This is family money." "It doesn't belong to you outright. Everything you have came from this family." My laugh was sharp and hollow. "Funny. I don't remember you in the office at 2 a.m. building this company from scratch. I don't recall you risking everything I had to make it real." Lucien smirked, leaning back in his chair with that infuriating arrogance I'd known my whole life. "You've always been the charity case, Rowella. Now you're just dressing it up with a company name." It landed like a slap. Every insult, every time I'd been diminished, every whispered comparison, he condensed them into one cruel sentence. But I didn't flinch. Not this time. I opened my folder, sliding a stack of papers across the table. "Here's what your management looks like," I said, my voice steady. "A condo Silas gifted me, retitled to Lucian, a trust you drained to zero, a jet that mysteriously disappeared, and that's just what we've found so far." For a moment, their facade cracked. Lucian's smirk faltered. Marigold's fingers twitched. Dorian's jaw tightened. Silas slammed his cane against the table, the sharp sound cutting through the room like a gunshot. "Enough of this game," he barked. "You've stolen enough. You will return what belongs to her, or I will drag you into court and I will make every detail of this public. Do you understand me?" No one spoke for several long seconds. Then, finally, Lucian exhaled through his nose. "Fine," he said, like he was offering a favor instead of conceding theft. "We'll sign." One of the attorneys slid the preliminary agreements across the table. They signed, slowly, deliberately, like it cost them something to move the pen. Silas watched them, unblinking. "If you betray this deal," he said quietly, "we go scorched earth." I took the papers, my hands steady. For a flicker of a moment, hope bloomed. Maybe this was the turning point. Maybe, for once, they were going to do the right thing. But as they left, Lucienne smirking again, my mother's serene mask firmly back in place, my father avoiding my eyes, I knew better. 2 days later, I learned just how little their signatures were worth. I woke up to my phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. At first, I thought it was an alarm I'd forgotten to set, but then I saw the flood of notifications. Emails, texts, calls, all marked urgent. My stomach twisted before I even unlocked the screen. "Have you seen this?" one message read. "Is it true?" Another, my assistant had left a dozen missed calls, each with increasingly panicked voicemails. I opened the news app, and there it was, splashed across the business headlines like a public execution. Lucien Marigold unveil new family-backed venture, correcting Rowella's mismanagement. My breath caught. They hadn't just broken their promise, they'd turned the knife. The article painted me as unstable, incompetent, incapable of running my own company. My mother was quoted, all cool and composed. "This is about protecting family assets. Rowella's heart is in the right place, but she's out of her depth. We've stepped in to safeguard what she couldn't." And Lucien, he didn't even try to hide his glee. "This isn't personal, it's business. Our family name deserves better stewardship." It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. By the time I reached the kitchen, my phone was still buzzing nonstop. Investors were demanding explanations. Employees were calling in panic, wondering if their jobs were safe. I couldn't even process who to respond to first. "They didn't just want my things," I whispered to no one. "They wanted me erased." I spent the next hour locked in my office at the condo, blinds drawn, staring at my laptop screen. Every word in that article felt like acid on my skin. I knew their patterns, they'd weaponized their influence before, but I'd underestimated just how far they'd go. This wasn't about negotiation. This was about obliteration. I thought I might break. Then my phone rang, a private number. "Rowella?" a voice said when I answered. It was one of my key investors, someone who'd been silent through all this. "I've seen what they're doing. It's ugly. But listen, I'm still with you. You need to hit them back. Hard. Don't wait for them to stop. They won't." It was a small spark, but it kept me from sinking completely. Later that afternoon, Silas arrived unannounced, cane tapping the hardwood floor as he entered my condo like he owned the place. "You've been quiet too long," he said before I could speak. "They've taken advantage because you let them. Do you understand that?" I swallowed hard. "I thought staying quiet kept the peace," I admitted. "But peace at that cost. It's slavery." Silas leaned on his cane and fixed me with a look that could cut through steel. "Then stop fighting like you're asking for their permission. They declared war. Start acting like it." It hit me harder than anything my parents had said. He was right. I'd been playing defense, clinging to some fantasy that they'd eventually care about decency. They didn't. They never would. That night, I made a decision. If they wanted to destroy me, they'd go down with me. I would gather every document, every receipt, every piece of evidence of their theft, not just the jet, not just the condo, but everything they'd siphoned from my life under the guise of family. I'd been scared to look too closely at certain files, folders I'd tucked away years ago, because I wasn't ready to face what they might reveal. But now, fear wasn't an option anymore. That night, I opened a folder I'd been too scared to touch for years, and found the weapon I needed. The folder was heavier than I remembered, not in weight, but in consequence. I carried it to the dining table and sat down, staring at the worn edges. My hands hesitated over the clasp for a moment. Once I opened it, there was no going back to the version of me who could still pretend things weren't as bad as I feared. I flipped it open. Inside were years of paperwork I'd tucked away because confronting it felt impossible. Bank statements I didn't understand at the time, old contracts, legal letters I'd been told to ignore. As I sifted through them, the threads began to connect. There it was. proof of transfers from Silas's trust fund, funneled through shell accounts I'd supposedly authorized. My name was on documents I'd never signed. My parents had used my identity like it was their personal tool, moving money from Silas's gifts into ventures they controlled. And Lucian, his name appeared again and again on assets that should have been mine. A luxury condo I never stepped foot in, accounts that bled funds until they were empty. It hit me like a slap. This wasn't carelessness. It wasn't them managing things for the family. It was deliberate, criminal. By mid-morning, Silas joined me in his office downtown, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. He listened in silence as I laid the evidence across his desk, my voice steadier than I expected. "They didn't just take what was mine," I said. "They used me. My name, my reputation. If this ever blew up, I'd be the one in handcuffs." Silas nodded slowly. "I suspected, but seeing it laid out, they've been playing a dangerous game." "We can stop them," I said. My voice sounded unfamiliar, firmer, older. His eyes softened with a kind of quiet pride. "Then we will, but we'll do it my way." By lunchtime, his legal team and a forensic accountant were in the conference room with us, mapping out our plan. "First," Silas said, tapping his cane against the table for emphasis, "we freeze every stolen asset, the condo, the accounts, lock them down." The accountant added, "With this evidence, a fraud report will hold. It's airtight. And if they refuse to comply," Silas continued, "we'll use the press. You're not just a victim, Rowella. You're the CEO of a rising company. They want to drag your name through the mud. We'll make sure they drown in their own filth first." I wrote everything down, step by step, feeling something grow inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. Power. "They always saw me as the weak one," I murmured. "That's why this will work. They'll never see it coming." As they packed up, I slipped a hand into my purse and found the small wing keychain Silas had given me at my grand opening. It had been just a trinket before, but now it felt like a promise. I traced the edges with my thumb and whispered to myself, "Time to fly." The next few hours blurred. Drafting statements, preparing documents, rehearsing what I'd say when the time came. I could feel the tension in the air, that quiet before a storm, when you know everything is about to change. Then, as evening approached, my phone buzzed. Lucien. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "We need to talk," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "Tonight, just you and me." I glanced at Silas. He raised a brow. "It's a trap," he mouthed. I put the call on speaker. "Fine," I said. "Where?" Lucian chuckled. "You'll know when you get there." When I hung up, Silas shook his head. "You don't owe them another second of your time." "No," I said, standing and gathering my folder. "But I do owe myself the chance to end this on my terms. Let them think I'm walking into it unarmed. If they wanted a meeting, I'd give them one, and burn their house of lies to the ground while I was at it." The luxury hotel suite Lucien had chosen smelled of money, expensive cologne, polished marble, and false promises. I walked in with my folder tucked under my arm, keeping my steps measured, controlled. They wanted me rattled. Instead, I was ice. Lucian was already there, leaning back in a velvet chair like he owned the place. My parents sat to his left, Marigold dressed as if this were a brunch at the club instead of a war council, Dorian scrolling his phone as if he were too busy for this meeting. "You came," Lucien said, his smirk practiced. "Good. This doesn't have to get ugly." "That's up to you," I replied, taking a seat across from them. I didn't look away, not even for a second. He folded his hands, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let's not waste time. You've overreached, Rowella. Mismanaged assets that were never fully yours to begin with. Our lawyers are prepared to file suit for embezzlement. But, he paused for effect, we're willing to keep this quiet if you sign over majority control of your company. It's cleaner for everyone. Marigold chimed in, her tone sugar-coated poison. Sweetheart, you don't have to do this the hard way. You wouldn't even have that company without us. This is just setting things back where they belong, with the family. I almost laughed. They'd actually rehearsed this. I see, I said, leaning forward, placing my folder on the table. So, you want me to give you my company? To protect me from a scandal you're fabricating? Dorian finally looked up from his phone. Call it what you want. It's business. You're acting like a child. That was their favorite line. Always had been. I opened the folder and began laying out the documents one by one. If anyone here has been acting like a child, it's you. You stole the condo Silas gifted me. You drained the trust fund he set up in my name. You sold the jet he gave me. And worst of all, you did it using my signature on fraudulent documents. Marigold's face drained of color, but Lucienne didn't flinch. Allegations. None of that will hold up. Except it already has, I said calmly. This isn't just theft, it's federal fraud. And as of this morning, I've filed a preliminary report. That got his attention. Lucien's smirk wavered. If I don't walk out of here with every stolen asset transferred back to me, I continued, then tomorrow morning the press runs the full story, with receipts. I'll make sure every investor, every client, every friend of yours sees exactly what you are. You wouldn't dare, Marigold hissed. Oh, I would, I said, my voice low. And you know it. For a moment the room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Then Lucien laughed, but it sounded forced. You're bluffing. The suite door opened. No, came a familiar voice from behind me. She's not. Silas walked in, his cane tapping sharply against the floor. Behind him were two federal investigators in dark suits. Marigold gasped. Dorian went pale. Even Lucien's smirk finally broke. I warned you, Silas said, his tone quiet but lethal. You've stolen enough, and now you're going to pay for it. I turned to Lucienne, looking him dead in the eye. You always said I was the charity case. Guess what? You're about to need charity lawyers. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. For the first time, I watched him realize he'd lost. Marigold started to protest. Silas, this is unnecessary. But Silas cut her off with a single glare. This ends now, he said. Every asset, every account, every stolen cent. Or I promise you, by tomorrow morning, you'll be answering questions from people who are far less patient than me. They scrambled to agree, their confidence collapsing like a house of cards. I sat there, steady, unshaken. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the overlooked daughter. I was the one holding the cards. When I walked out of that room, I didn't just leave with my assets. I left with their fear. When I left that hotel suite, the night air felt different, not lighter, not yet, but clearer. I had walked in as the daughter they'd underestimated all my life and walked out as someone they couldn't dismiss anymore. They weren't just giving me back what was mine. They were afraid. And they should be. The weeks that followed were a blur of signatures, transfers, and terse legal exchanges. The jet. Back under my name. The condo. Deeded to me in full. The trust fund they'd drained, restored, with penalties. Lucien, who once strutted around as if he owned the world, signed an NDA so airtight he couldn't so much as whisper my name in public. Marigold and Dorian, my parents, in name only, quietly packed up and moved out of state, trading their sprawling house for something smaller, far away from the circles they'd once flaunted their status in. I thought I'd feel triumphant. I thought I'd want to celebrate. But when I walked through the halls of my company headquarters, taking in the quiet hum of work in progress, I realized victory wasn't as sweet as I imagined. I got everything back. But the little girl who spent years begging for their love, twisting herself into someone they could be proud of, she was gone. I stood by my office window one evening, watching the city lights blink on like stars scattered across the streets. Atlanta had always been home, but for the first time, I felt like I truly belonged to it, not to them. My phone buzzed. Silas. "Dinner," his message read. "My place, tonight." Hours later, I found myself at his estate, the smell of roasted herbs and old leather books wrapping around me like a familiar blanket. He greeted me at the door with that knowing look, the one that always made me feel 10 years old and fully seen at the same time. "You did well," he said simply, ushering me inside. "I survived," I replied. He chuckled, leading me to the dining room. "There's a difference between surviving and winning, Rowella. You didn't just survive." Over dinner, he reached into his pocket and placed something small and metallic on the table. The wing keychain. The one he'd given me at the grand opening. "I gave you this to remind you," he said softly. "You were never grounded. You just needed to see it." I stared at the keychain, my throat tightening. "I wanted them to love me," I admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "And they can't," he said. "But that's their failure, not yours." I smiled through the sting of tears, clutching the keychain like it was more than just metal, like it was the proof of everything I'd fought for. In the days that followed, I knew I couldn't just walk back into life as if nothing had changed. I poured myself into creating a fund for young women entrepreneurs, women like me who'd been overlooked, dismissed, told they were nothing without someone else's name attached. If I could spare even one of them the pain I endured, it would all mean something. As for my family, I cut off contact completely. No more phone calls, no more fake holiday invitations, no more giving them pieces of me to break. Peace isn't something they can give me. It's something I had to claim for myself. One evening, I stood on the rooftop garden of my company, the sun sinking low and painting the sky in gold and crimson. The city stretched out before me, alive, unbothered by my scars. I held the wing keychain in my hand and whispered to no one in particular, "They clipped my wings, but I grew new ones." It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even about winning. It was freedom. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing their approval. I was flying on my own, and that was enough.